I'm Big Don Luka, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
In the midst of school starting for both Jaren and I, we have somehow got just the slightest smidge of time to crank out a podcast for you guys. Obviously, we do apologize for last week. As we told you guys, we were starting school, and there may be some, just unexpected turbulence, with that. But after our first week, we have got our schedules much more aligned, and we're locked in now, but we're not locked on Mavs, Jaren. We're the Mainstream Mavs podcast. Jaren, how have you been doing, and what have you been keeping up with as far as the Mavericks go? You've released some articles. What have you been up to?
Yeah, so if you don't know now, me and Will are contributing at the Smoking Cuban, and I had some big stories come out this most recent week. I'll have one come out this week about Josh Green. I won't release the reasons as to what that article is about or the contents that article will be about, because I think it'll be kind of fun. But just last week we had me and you both had some big articles come out, but whether regarding the schedule coming out, Kyrie versus Brunson, just some fun topics that Mavs fans kind of want to hear about, through the offseason with the lackluster set of content that's been coming through. But outside of that, I've been ramping up with FIBA a little bit. Kind of got my first time, but I got to watch some games for the first time today with Team USA versus Greece. I got to watch a little bit of that, but outside of that, it's been a pretty basketball-less kind of week. But starting school, the grind starts now, and I'm excited to be back on the podcast. I know we are looking to produce more content now that we're back in the swing of things and got a rhythm going.
Yeah, well, we did promise the listeners that last time would be the last time that was going to happen.
But
yes, but we also did have some unexpected delays, particularly in my personal life, that kind of prevented some things last week from coming out. But we've moved past that now, and we're on to bigger and better things. So today we are going to be getting into more specifically the 10, or we actually have 12 moments listed, so I don't know if we'll end up cutting 2, but we'll see what we do. But we're going to be ranking the top 10 to 12 greatest moments from the Mavericks last season. Obviously going to have to do a couple of these kind of filler episodes where we backtrack and either back to before last season and maybe talk about a what if scenario, or we just do a sort of ceremonial thing like, oh, what were the tests, 10 funnest moments from last year, 10 best moments. But obviously, this is just sort of the scorekeeping you kind of got to do throughout the off season. It does suck not having a just solid ebb and flow of content being spoon fed to you all the time. But it's also fun to look at these podcasts, or have these type of podcasts, and do some content that, otherwise we really wouldn't have the time to do amidst a pretty busy and hectic season. So we'll be getting into that today. And we'll also be talking about how the Mavericks have been faring at the World Cup. World Cup officially kicked off 3 days ago. Australia and, Josh Green and Dante Exum, they've been playing pretty well so far. Luka obviously has started off World Cup play with like 2 30-plus point games, maybe 35 plus, point, and is leading all of FIBA in scoring. Admittedly, he has gone against some pretty weak and brittle opponents. Jaren and I were not able to watch the games because, we do have school, and the games are at like 6 a.m. or else we would do our absolute darndest to watch them for you guys. But we will talk about them. We were able to go over them at least a little bit. And we are excited to, continue Slovenia and Australia's World Cup run, and as well as Dwight Powell in Canada. But he makes more of a token appearance on this podcast. So, needless to say, Luka obviously is not in the most heavy matchup difficulty group stage within the World Cup, comparable to some of these other teams. But once they get past group play, if Slovenia does come out of that Group B category, things could get very interesting. And, despite Slovenia's strength of their roster definitely being a little bit hindered, obviously, by, Vlatko Konchar going down with that injury in that preparation game, tore his ACL, prayers to him, of course. As well as, Goran Dragic not playing this year. Slovenia is not the powerhouse or I don't even know if I should call it a powerhouse, but they're not the basketball squad that they were just over a year ago. And it'll be really intriguing to see if this roster, can come together in a sort of roundabout way. And if Luka's going to be spearheading that. He just released or he's doing like a little short series / documentary type deal that he's been posting on his social medias about the Slovenian national team. And, each episode kind of gives some insight into their World Cup run. So if they were to, actually win the whole thing, I'm sure that would be a very cool docu-series. So definitely check that out if you guys get a second. But, other than that, I really can't think of anything else Mavs related that's been happening really over the last like week or two since Jaren actually did that podcast with our guest Debbie and Dalton Pybus. They came up on the show and talked about Dirk's Hall of Fame enshrinement. If you guys would like to go listen to that, was the last episode. But if you have nothing else, Jaren, we will go ahead and go into this intro real quick.
Outside of I do believe that Slovenia actually already qualified for elimination rounds, but outside of that, I got nothing. So they automatically advance because they won the first 2 games, and then I think their last game is against Jordan. I think so.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Well, so they already qualified. They're just essentially playing this game to play it.
Yeah, well, they're playing for first place, I believe. Maybe they're already. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how FIBA works.
We'll need to get into the bracketology of the World Cup a little bit more, and we'll be back after the intro. We're gonna look that up during the intro. But before we do that, here is an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters. All right, Jaren. So kicking it off here with, starting with Luka Doncic's back-to-back 35-plus point performances in group play. I need to correct myself before the intro. I said Group B. He is in Group F with the Slovenian national team. They beat Georgia pretty handily today, and they are slated to play Cape Verde in their last group stage game of Group F play. And then they'll move on to their next group stage. And after that, hopefully they will be steadfast towards working towards a FIBA World Cup championship, or, at least getting to the semifinals or quarterfinals. But we'll just have to see how everything plays out. But, given that they were in pretty favorable position in their bracket, having, to only go against Venezuela and Georgia so far, not the strongest opponents, they were able to get some pretty decisive victories. Jaren, we obviously haven't had, time to dissect and really watch these games like we told the listeners, but how continually impressed are you by Luka's shape this offseason and how he's playing for Slovenia amidst them being pretty shorthanded here, especially with, his last 2 games essentially leading the tournament in scoring?
Yeah, absolutely. I know there was a crazy stat that came out. I think Grant Afsef was the one that reported on it, but Luka Doncic scored every single point in that first quarter for Slovenia outside of 4 points, which he had assisted on. And I mean, that to me is just mind bewildering. It only speaks to, what kind of work Luka Doncic has been doing this offseason. But I'm going to confidently say this might be a hot take. Someone else might say, oh, Kevin Durant, some other player who's some nifty scorer like that can do more than what Luka is doing. But I confidently will say this, that Luka Doncic at the FIBA level is the only guy that can average 35 plus points. It's absolutely insane to see because, I do think that it is a very hard level to score on due to the smaller court and just really the defensive, kind of the levels that not levels, but kind of the rules that play against the offense in favor of the defense at the FIBA level. So just to see him kind of dictate really everything in that matter and go out there and ball out and do everything that Luka Doncic does, throw some crazy passes, throw some crazy lobs, and, of course, knock down a million threes. It's always fun to watch. And I got a chance to watch some of the highlights, which I was very thankful for because I know that FIBA has been throwing out like 3-minute highlights and I got a chance to watch those. But yeah, I mean, dominant fashion against Georgia. At one point in time, it was a close game, probably until about the third quarter. And Slovenia just pulled away. And same goes, I think, who's their first game against? I forget who their I don't honestly remember who their first game against was.
Venezuela.
Venezuela, that's right. Venezuela was shooting the lights out. I do know that, and they still just pulled away, won by 15, of course. But yeah, I mean, just the game that Luka Doncic is playing right now is on another planet compared to everybody else. Leading FIBA in scoring, I think only behind Carlick Jones, who's only played one game, and then Shai Gilgeous, who's played 2 games. So those guys are pretty much on the only level-headed playing field as Luka. But outside of that, I mean, it's been a complete fest of scoring for Slovenia. And winning, of course, 2 of their 2 games, and they'll play Cape Verde, I think, in 2 days. And then, of course, as you mentioned before, they'll play the winner of Group F or Group E, I think it was, which is, as it stands right now, it's Germany and Australia. But Australia plays Japan, who are tied right now, and winner of that will get to advance. That happens tomorrow morning, so we'll see what happens there. I'm hoping it's Australia pulling for Josh Green and, of course, Dante Exum, but. Yeah, I mean, just a crazy coincidence, or not coincidence, but crazy games played in favor of Slovenia. It's been, through the 3-minute highlights that I've seen, because, it's hard to get access to these games, especially whenever they're so early. But through the highlights that I have seen, it's been really fun and, really just eye-opening to see what kind of work he's been putting in.
No, most definitely. And admittedly, he obviously hasn't faced, probably the caliber of strength of opponent that some of, the other NBA stars in the tournament have had to go up against, just in 2 group stage games here. But I mean, as the tournament continues to churn along, if, Luka is able to reciprocate that sort of production that he was last year, as well as what we're seeing early on in group play into the latter half of the tournament, then, I mean, that's going to be really special for Slovenia. And it's definitely going to, shine a pretty bright light upon his conditioning and his work ethic this summer. And that's needed from a national media perspective, as much as he gets flack from people, probably fairly unfairly. But every once in a while you got to throw in the fairly unfairly juxtaposition. But nonetheless, though, it'll definitely be really interesting to see how Slovenia ends up faring throughout the next couple weeks. The latest that they could play, for anybody who is worried that it might interfere with Mavs training camp, is September 10th. That would be the championship of the World Cup if they were to make it that far. So luckily, I believe training camp's not even starting until early October this year, because there has not been a formal announcement yet. So we are chilling on that front. But every summer that we get to see Luka play at the international level and not get hurt is a blessing in itself. While he is still young, I do think, just for his increased development, whatever he can marginally improve on, despite how good he is, it's great for him to be over there. It's great for him to be in the, idealistic shape that he's in right now. Obviously preparing for the national team, he cranked up his workload heading into the summer, and, we've seen him in years past celebrate with some hookah and beer and everything like that amidst, Slovenia's successes. Not saying he can't do that in some capacity this year, but I do think that there is an increased feeling of having to take care of his body. If you've listened to any of the comments that, he's made, with his trainer, or that his trainer's made this offseason, it does seem as if Luka's poised to carry on this level of conditioning and work ethic into Mavericks training camp, which is extremely encouraging. And in the same vein of which we watched Dirk in his national team career, watching Luka as he's young until he one day he may not be able to play national ball, really is a special side. I definitely will have to get a Luka Slovenia jersey at some point. I tried last year off of a pretty mysterious website, and did not end up receiving the jersey in the end. I can't remember if I actually went through with the payment or not, or if I was going to, but yeah, needless to say, that hopefully will come in the mail one day. Now I'll get and we'll get Jaren a Dwight Powell Canada jersey, just
there we go.
because he contributes some on the podcast every once in a while. But anyways, we'll continue to monitor Luka and Slovenia's World Cup games accordingly, but we also need to talk a little bit about some of the other Mavs that are at the World Cup. Jaren, what have you thought of Dante Exum and Josh Green so far, playing for Australia this World Cup. Both of them have been, pretty impressive in my opinion, despite their roles kind of being relegated to more of complementary bench pieces on a pretty strong Australian national team that has quite a few NBA players like Patty Mills, Josh Giddey, Matisse Thybulle, just to name a few. What have we seen from them so far? Should Mavs fans be worried based on what they're seeing? Should they raise their expectations based on what we're seeing out of both of those guys? I admittedly have not got a chance to watch any Australian games in full, but I definitely have watched some highlights of a couple of their group, of their preparation games. And I'm definitely going to try to, go back and watch some of their group play games. So what have you gathered from those two guys so far?
Yeah, I think Dante Exum, he's kind of a guy that was, brought on, of course, in the offseason, was more of an undercovered signing, I would say, and didn't really have a whole lot of hype around him. But I think that that's a guy that could warrant some hype. He's had a very strong international performance thus far, and again, as you said, that both Josh Green and him have been kind of reduced to a complimentary bench role. But him in particular, Dante Exum, that is in particular, he has had a very strong showcasing on offense. I do know that he nailed down some threes so far, just between preparation and group stage play. He's nailed down some threes. He's looked really good in transition from what I've seen. But outside of that, I haven't really heard anything else. I'm sure his defense is as stout as it really ever, or as it always has been. And then, moving on to Josh Green, I know that a lot of Mavs fans have been kind of concerned with his, kind of reduction or his reduced offensive role for Australia. I know that he's, only touching the ball a handful of times, and in that he's only shooting about 1 or 2 times a game. But just in terms of, I guess, filling around the spaces or filling around the spots that are needed, we've seen a really improved Josh Green in terms of that category. I think his defensive game has been really good. I know that he got either a steal or a block in that first group stage game. I don't remember who they played. I think it was Finland. But I know that they got a steal, or he got a steal or a block. I can't remember what it was, but defensively, he's looked really strong. And offensively, from the time that he's gotten with the ball, he actually has looked pretty impressive, I will say.
Yeah, he's looked really good as a ball mover so far. Just keeping the possession alive. You can definitely see that he might not be granted as much leniency within the Australian national team offense, just due to the wide array of NBA players that they have. Not saying that that's going to necessarily be the case with the Mavericks, or that he even shouldn't have a bigger role in the Australian national team, but they do have a lot of veterans over there. Hence why, a guy like Dante Exum, who, by all NBA standards, may be worse than Josh Green. I mean, I guess we'll see next year, obviously. But, having been out the league and stuff like that, he's getting a little bit more, offensive duties delegated to him from a playmaking and ball handling perspective. We're seeing him, attack decisively in one-on-one scenarios and finish at the basket, make a few threes, like Jaren said. Definitely something that we're going to have to see an increased sample size from, because we didn't see it from him in the first couple games with Australia. So, I mean, that's obviously going to be the biggest sticking point with him and his tenure with Dallas as training camp unfolds up here in a month or so. But from the defensive side of things, and, just playing the role in which both of those guys have been asked, I haven't seen anything alarming. And I've been really happy to have watched them. I really do hope that we get to see, both of them guard Luka at some point. If Slovenia does end up meeting up with Australia in when they play in the Group K and L games and stuff like that, once both of those teams advance. But obviously Australia will have to win. You said they're playing Japan right now, or is that tomorrow?
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah, so they play Japan tomorrow morning. If Japan wins, then unfortunately we will not have the luxury to see that, but that would be a very fun game as far as FIBA World Cup goes. But do we want to touch up on Dwight Powell at all with Team Canada?
I will say is I do know that Canada is playing very well as a team. I do know that, but
yes.
All I've seen is him in some Instagram posts. I'll put it at
that.
So.
I mean, I haven't. It seems like he's playing a pretty minimal role for the squad right now. I mean, I've seen him. I saw a few Twitter posts that definitely didn't shed the brightest light upon his playing time that he was getting. But it'll be intriguing to see how much he's used going forward. Obviously, Canada stacked. Dwight's not starting for them, is he?
I think Kelly Olynyk is their starting center.
Yeah, so he's not even a starter, but it's great to see him still being involved with his country and his national team. Happy for him from that perspective, because I don't think he's played with Team Canada in a minute, if I'm mistaken.
I think that I'm honestly not sure, but I know it's been a while.
Yeah, I know exactly. At least anything that at least at a level as competitive as the World Cup. I can't even remember if he played. I think he was on that Olympic team in Tokyo, but I would need to go check. Obviously we're not going to trip too heavy over Dwight Powell's role on the Canadian national team, but if he gets any, game breaking or shattering dunks, then the Mainstream Mavs podcast will be the first to tweet about it. Well, you can bet your ass that will be the case. But otherwise, Jaren, let's get into these 10 best moments of the season from the Dallas Mavericks in the 2022-23. Oh my God. The Dallas Mavericks 2022-23 season. Guys, I'm already ready to move on to the 2023-24 season. I've essentially had it like penciled in my head that we're already there. So it's been kind of difficult, both in media writing as well as on the podcast to, have to recite back and say the previous year. So I apologize about that, but nonetheless, there were a lot of fun moments amidst a pretty underwhelming season. In every season, there are certain things that I think that you can extract that do matter, and from a momentum perspective, or just from a significant standpoint, that are cool to at least look back upon. Jaren and I specifically put in a lot of hard work this season. In our first real season covering basketball throughout a full 82 game season. Obviously, we wish to be more expansive in our coverage, hence our writing, and we definitely are gearing up for a better season this year. But I think the 2022-23 season will definitely hold a special place in our hearts from that perspective, even though the Mavericks did end up finishing 38-44. So, from that perspective, we definitely at least, like to rehash some of these moments. And there's not really much else to talk about right now besides the FIBA stuff in the off season. So kicking it off here, without further ado, we do have a couple honorable mentions to get into before we get into the top 10 here. Jaren, what are some of the honorable mentions that we have in this list of the 10 best moments that the Mavericks had in the 2022-23 season?
Yeah, these all three happen to be games that did occur. So two of them we actually went to. So anyways, we have the home opener against the Grizzlies. I think our youthfulness as fans, our innocence,
naivety,
was fully obstruct that
yes.
night. We thought we were going high. We thought we were going to win a few games that year. We were beating the shit out of the Grizzlies, who of course were touted as a good team at that time, and still, I mean, they finished as a 2 seed. So, but I mean, in better words, we beat the shit out of them. So like that's really as you can say.
I will add context. This was the Mavericks home opener of the regular season.
Yes,
the Mavericks ended up winning by over 40. If I do recall, the Grizzlies were on a second back-to-back. Yes. And if I can't remember right, they may have had a couple players out, but I know Jaw was playing. They did.
Triple J. I know Triple J wasn't, and I think Steven Adams played.
Yeah,
Steven Adams played, but Triple J was out.
Yeah, and I also remember Desmond Bane having a terrible game that game, and then literally the next week of the year, he ends up having a crazy performance versus the Nets. Had 40 in an overtime game, or 30 or something like that. But it was funny because the Grizzlies actually did get off to a little skid to start the season, and then they quickly turned it around shortly after that Mavs game. But I mean, it's kind of a game that we can write off, obviously, as not having mattered whatsoever. And with the Mavericks, winning by that much, it at least did hold some significance at the time, because we were riding fairly high in the moment. I think Jaren and I both still had our reservations over the game. It was a really weird game because it was the first game of the year, so you're not really knowing what to expect. We're just excited to see basketball, and for lack of a better term, it wasn't even necessarily the Mavs defense, I feel like, that really threw things off, but the Grizzlies just missed a shit ton of open shots all game. They couldn't hit the broadside of the barn. Besides Jaw, occasionally getting to the rim, he did play pretty excellent despite not having the best shooting game. It was a really weird game, but it was fun at the time. So hence why it isn't higher up on the list. Jaren, what are the other two we got here?
So we got November 29th versus the Warriors. That was the first time we saw the Warriors since the Western Conference Finals, and I believe the score was 115 to 112 if I remember right, and we ended up winning. I remember that game just because, again, it was, we beat the Warriors for the first time since the Western Conference Finals. And Luka had an amazing game, and Josh Green. I think that was the Josh Green coming out game. That was very memorable. And then last for the honorable mentions, we got April 5th versus the Kings. That was like the last win of the season. But it was also just a very good team win. Me and Will were in attendance for that one. And I won't say who we were cheering for, but it was a fun game to watch either way. And it was back and forth pretty much up until late in the fourth quarter, where Kyrie just went absolutely to work. And I don't want to say this, but I want to say this. That's like one of the most beautiful performances that I've ever seen in person. Was that Kyrie? He had like 37 or 35. I can't remember.
In that fourth quarter, he had like either a shade under 20 or like 20,
yeah,
21, something like that.
Yeah,
he was. I mean, it was the ultimate display of just like multifaceted scoring that I'd ever seen from a point guard in a basketball game. He was hitting. I mean, Davion Mitchell is one of the best guard defenders in the NBA. I think
absolutely.
Everybody can say that. It's a very fair consensus. And Kyrie Irving made him look like, he was playing against a 4-year-old out there. And and it's not even like he could really even do anything about it. Like Davion was playing great defense. Kyrie, just winning within the margins on every single play. If he got to the rim beforehand, he would settle for a fall away, turn around mid-range jump shot and somehow cash it in despite, how difficult it was. Or then, the ensuing possession, come back with a couple jab steps, into the shot clock 3. I mean, it was just like there was no board on the chess move that you could make to stop Kyrie Irving's his entourage that night. I mean, that was a very special moment in game, despite it having a sort of weird feel around it, because the Mavericks were obviously in the midst of debating whether they should tank or not, essentially, for lack of a better term. As they approached, the end of the last 2 regular season games there. They only had 2 regular season games left after that point, both with the Bulls and the Spurs. And, they were in the midst of being kind of caught up in a weird tiebreaker scenario with Chicago, who would, end up getting that 10th pick, was obviously a hot question at the time. And, the Mavericks end up losing that game versus the Bulls, end up getting the 10th pick to secure themselves still having a pick in the draft, because obviously their 10th pick was owed to the Knicks, or if it was if it was a greater pick than top 10, if it ended up being 10 to 15 or 10 to 20, something like that, the Mavericks would have had to have sent that pick to New York as part of the Kristaps Porzingis trade, obviously, where they traded their 2023 first round pick, but they did have the top 10 protections on it. So that was quite a ride in history, but also really not too far long ago amidst some of the offseason moves that the Mavericks have made. I do think the feeling is obviously a lot better than it was at that time, but we always have to still have that context of how the Mavericks ended the season. We can't get too excited, too optimistic for this next season, knowing that. But that was a really fun game, to say the least. But barring that, let's just go ahead and slide into the top 10 now.
All right, guys. So unfortunately, we did have a little bit of an interference. We had some technological issues, so we're in a little bit of a remote setting right now. We are at the University of North Texas in a undisclosed location, somewhere hiding. But Jaren and I still are here to finish out the podcast and rank these 10 best moments from the Mavericks in the 2022-23 season before we were rudely interrupted by Jaren's computer going completely haywire.
Yeah, no explanation here other than the part that, I'm going to blame this one on Microsoft, and we'll leave it at that. So
yeah, most definitely. But let's go ahead and get into this list, Jaren. So at 10th, we obviously just listed those honorable mentions, some great moments there, but at 10, and we're gonna go in ascending order from 10 up. We have the March 5th game versus the Suns. This was a matinee day game on ABC.
Yes.
High stakes affair. Is when the Mavericks were still jousting for playoff position. They weren't their hopes of getting to the playoffs were not completely dwindled at this point in time. KD had just been traded to the Suns at the trade deadline, and it made for a very exciting back and forth affair all game. Luka and Kyrie were going after it, and KD ends up, sealing the game with some free throws, but him and Kyrie were chirping a little bit, Luka and Booker. Needless to say, as you quoted here in the notes, it reignited the rivalry. And obviously the Mavericks lost that game, hence why we have it, all the way down at the 10th spot. But, I think that it did set forth a sort of agenda going forward between these two teams that, because the Suns had got the better of the Mavericks early in the season with that Damian Lee game winner. And I think the Mavericks won at home. So, I think that, once the Mavericks obviously played the Suns very viably with KD there as well, that definitely, set the groundwork to be like, okay, regardless of who's on our roster, you're going to respect us. This is a real thing after that playoff series. And, the Suns can disregard it all they want. But needless to say, Game 7, the 40-point blowout speaks for itself. And we have plenty of opportunities next season with the NBA's rivalry week, as well as Christmas Day, perhaps even the midseason tournament, to get more revenge in the playoffs. So not the biggest Phoenix guys over here, but I do have an appreciation for Jock Landale, but luckily he's elsewhere.
He's in San Antonio now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, to speak more to that March 5th game, yes, it was a matinee day game, and I do believe that Phoenix and Dallas at that point in time, I think that they were kind of both jousting for playoff positions, and both of them were looking like they possibly could have had a 4-5 or 3-6 seed matchup in the playoffs, and we could have possibly seen that Phoenix Suns team again. Of course, the rest is history. The Mavericks, of course, fall to the 11th seed and everything like that happens. But I think, there's no other word to say it other than, it pretty much reignited the rivalry. Bless you, Will.
Thank you.
It reignited the rivalry. And obviously the Mavericks lost, but, we got to see the Kyrie versus Kevin Durant. That was their first matchup against each other since, of course, being on the Brooklyn Nets. They chirped. And then, of course, Booker and Luka always chirp. And even Kyrie got in Booker's face at one point in time after the game, or not after the game, but actually it may have been after the game whenever they're walking off the court. I can't remember.
Well, no, so it was with a few seconds left.
Yeah, with the free throws. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of hot heads going into that. And, of course, we will see that team plenty of more times regarding next season's schedule. So, we're looking forward to that. But moving on to number 9, this one, it could be as high as we'll say 5, and it could be probably in the honorable mentions list depending on how you look at this.
Or not even on the list for some fans.
Or not even the list, for some fans. But we went the April 7th versus the Chicago Bulls. The Mavericks finally decided to take a route, and of course they tanked that game, and that was the infamous, what was it, $750,000 fine?
Yes.
That Mark Cuban got fined for. And I mean, there's a lot of headlines going into that game where the Mavericks going to win out, where the Mavericks going to tank. And, pretty much headed into that game, it was already unlikely that the Mavericks are going to make the playoffs. So hindsight.
They were tied, I believe, or in very not too dissimilar records to Chicago, and they were both vying for that 10th worst spot because they definitely would have had to. I don't think the Mavericks held the tiebreaker between the two teams in terms of who would have ended up drawing 10th, or they would have had to, if they did tie and everything was completely, drawn out, then they would have had to have redrawn lottery balls just to select who would have the best odds going into before the lottery. So, it was a bit of a precarious position. And Jaren and I were actually watching the game at work, funny enough. We ended up doing the post-game pod afterwards. We watched the recording, but we were frantically sort of rooting for the Bulls to win in that game, but not in the sense that we didn't want to see success come Dallas's way. We just knew that would be the biggest route to that would pay the most dividends in the offseason.
And that's what we see.
And they ended up getting the 10th pick, and had they not done that, they would have had a lot less flexibility. And, I think that there would be a different sort of impetus heading into this season than there is now. after accruing Derek Lively and, Olivier Maxence Prosper and Rashawn Holmes on draft night. I mean, that's like, the bulk of the offseason right there.
Yeah.
Obviously the marquee free agent signings and, Grant Williams, Derek Jones, Seth Curry. But I don't think that looks near as promising, especially from a post Kyrie perspective, as well as, when you're looking at this window of, Luka has 3 years remaining on his contract. I wouldn't say that uncertainty is looming in the air in regards to that, but there is a little bit of skepticism in when we're talking about his contract and what his future in Dallas is going to be, just because we don't have any, tangible, definitive proof that he's for sure going to want to stay. But he's obviously got a home here. He just got married. He's a very loyal individual, but we can't, mistake him for the stereotype of most, European superstars, that they're just going to be devoutly loyal and not change up. Because look at Giannis Antetokounmpo right now. He just came out with a quote, literally, that he, if things were to, not go in this direction that he wanted to, he would definitely consider leaving Milwaukee next offseason. He just signed a 5-year max extension. So in the modern NBA, where stars have the power to wheel and deal wherever they want, you can never be too sure that your franchise player is going to stay. You don't know what he could be feeling internally in regards to wanting to win and all that sort of stuff. There's a bunch of narrative and agenda pushing in today's NBA that has only grown since the 90s and the 80s, when we saw rivalries and all that sort of stuff develop. So, you never know how players are interpreting their standing in the media. And, if they feel like they need to, that one ring that they won for that city wasn't enough at the end of the day, which obviously there's a desire to win there. But, if they feel like the desire to win overrides having to do it, at a homegrown level, then you never know, despite how loyal Luka is. So that'll definitely, be interesting to see going forward. But nonetheless, the April 7th game versus the Bulls is a sort of microcosm of that, because if the Mavericks don't end up winning that, I do think that bridge to the potential, I wouldn't say post Luka era, but when Luka's entering his prime, if he's staying or if he does leave, it would be a lot less. There would be a lot less work constructed on that bridge, Jaren.
Yeah.
If the Mavericks were not to gain Olivier Maxence Prosper and Derek Lively that night. So I can understand certain fans' perspective of wanting to win at all costs and not necessarily believing in the Mavericks tanking from a morals perspective. It kind of just depends on your interpretation of the NBA and what have you, but I don't fault anybody's viewpoints. And I obviously the Dallas Mavericks did the best thing at the end of the day, given their situation. Had their situation even been marginally different, I would have probably begged to differ that they should have won the game. But they literally almost statistically had no chance of making the playoffs. So yeah, because of the dividends it ended up paying, it comes in at the number 9 spot here. But it obviously not without controversy. Number 8 though, the Christmas Day game versus the Lakers.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that one almost historic in a way, because I believe that was the first Christmas Day game since the 2012 season opener against the Miami Heat. And of course the Mavericks ended up beating the crap out of the Lakers. It was a close game from what I remember in that first half. The Mavericks just couldn't really make any shots. And I don't know what kind of halftime speech Jason Kidd gave to the Mavericks, but it was pretty much a halftime switch. In that third quarter, I believe the Mavericks almost scored 50 points as a team. Tim Hardaway Jr. was going off. Luka Doncic was going off. I even think Maxey was Maxey hurt at that point? I can't.
Yes, he was. He was.
So, but yeah, there was a number of guys that were kind of going off. I think even Reggie started to nail a few shots, and that was giving us some hope. But yeah, that Christmas Day game definitely sticks out, obviously, because it's Christmas Day. It's in Dallas. It's against the Lakers on prime time. And the Mavericks pretty much took care of business. I think it was Anthony Davis-less Lakers, but still LeBron was playing for that team. And the Lakers were in a huge question mark, obviously, at that point in time. But the Mavericks really did take care of business. And honestly, that was kind of a feel-good win. And if I remember right, that kind of led way for a pretty big win streak, which we'll get into a little bit later. But that led way for a pretty big win streak that happened, I believe, in the month of March or a little bit later in December. I can't remember honestly, but
Yeah, no, it was within that
or
win
month of
streak.
January. That's what I'm
Yeah.
gonna say. But
But it's kind of funny looking back at a lot of these moments, reading into the tea leaves of, some of the podcasts that we were doing back then. I do remember a strong sense of, appreciation, obviously, that the Mavericks were winning. But even amidst the 7-game win streak, there was never a feeling of security in terms of how good that team was. And you could see it, based on the product that the Mavericks were putting out in the court. I mean, they were beating people, but a lot of it was due, admittedly, just strictly to hot shooting.
and Luka Doncic.
And Luka Doncic, yeah. But I mean, that Christmas Day game was really fun because that was the first, like you said, Jaren, first time Dallas had a home game on Christmas since the 2011-12 season where they got swept by the Heat right after the championship. And it was just a really fun, jovial time. The Dirk statue was unveiled.
That's right, yeah.
And, obviously you had to beat up on LeBron on Christmas Day and go crazy from 3-point land in the second half. You can't really ask for a better win. Obviously, I guess NBA fans probably could have asked for a better game given that both rosters were not necessarily at full capacity in that game. But it nonetheless, from a feel-good perspective, it was definitely a highlight of the season. But next up, we actually have Luka's 50-point streak, and it was within the tail end of December when Luka had 3 separate 50-plus point affairs. One of them ended up being a 60, 20, and 10 game versus the Knicks, and then he had a 50-point game against the Rockets and Spurs. But I don't, right after, right before that, but I can't remember the
Blazers or I can't remember who the
yeah,
50-point game was.
yeah. I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was definitely that James Harden-esque type of carrying that you saw on some of those admittedly kind of atrocious small ball lineups, that the Rockets had pre Chris Paul back in like the 2016, 2015 days. And Luka was just carrying the Mavericks, and in every single one of these games that the win streaks, Christian Wood was the only sort of I guess supplementary piece that was really helping out from an offensive perspective at that time. With the Maxey injury, I believe Josh got hurt around that time. Yeah, I don't even know if he was playing. The team just lacked shot creation and defense in all aspects. This is after they waived Kemba, of course, too. So, Jaden Hardy really hadn't came into fruition either. So, I mean, you're really just looking at Luka and Spencer as the only 2 ball handlers on the team. And he was playing otherworldly, shooting the lights out, getting to whatever spot he wanted to on the floor, being definitely the true, tried and true 3-level scorer, and absolute, just unit of a playmaker that he was. He was. I think it's honestly the best brand of basketball I've probably seen Luka play throughout his career during that little 50 game or that 50-point stretch throughout consecutive games, because he just looked at another level of savvy. Like, obviously you hear the cliche term that Luka, makes the game look easier than, it actually is and all that sort of stuff all the time just due to his play style. But, in those games, he just got to his spots very effortlessly. And I mean, yes, it was admittedly not against, the most high-end opponents or the most, high-end defenses in the league. But it seemed like he could, create space and essentially do whatever he wanted from anywhere. And, I'm not saying that he can't do that any game when he gets hot, but particularly against, those teams and those defenses, I mean, it just like didn't even look like it was hard for him to do what he did, which was, I think, probably the most astonishing part of it all. But, obviously it is an individual accomplishment at the end of the day, hence why we don't have it higher on this list, but it still does come in at the number 7 spot.
Yeah, and again, to speak to that point, like, I mean, he was playing, of course, in that New York game. Like, New York was a pretty, well set defense because, again, it's under, I don't know why I can't remember.
Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah, Tom Thibodeau. Yeah, I don't know why I can remember that name. But Obi Toppin, I believe, was out of that game. And I think that was honestly, I think everybody else played between the Knicks, besides Jalen Brunson, of course. But yeah, I mean, he played some decent defenses, and then of course he also played the Houston Rockets and then the San Antonio Spurs, which kind of speaks for itself. Those teams are very weak-handed. But yeah, I mean, that's probably the most incredible professional athletic feat that I think anyone has seen on any given night. The fact that he could do that night in and night out for what was it, like 2 weeks, was pretty incredible in itself. And of course, Pop's coming out and saying right before the game that what's your goal for Luka, and he pretty much said to hold him less than 50 points, and they didn't do that because Luka had 50 on that night.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was very fun to watch. And looking back at it in hindsight, I think that kind of streak honestly kind of strangle-held Luka for the rest of the season. I think that in a way he was almost, he exerted so much energy throughout that run that it kind of led way through later in the season once we got up, towards the March and of course April games, that it was kind of, first off, it was pointless to play those games at full 100 level because the Mavericks weren't really competing for a spot or a valuable seed in the playoffs. And second off, I think that he just honestly didn't have the juice to do so. But now that he is Kyrie Irving, that of course will hopefully not happen, but we'll move on later to Kyrie and Luka together a little bit later. But moving on to the number 6 spot, we just talked about a little bit earlier, but that 7-game win streak. I don't remember the exact teams, but I know it was 2 Rockets wins. I want to say San Antonio win and even Blazers from what I can remember. I don't remember who else it was, but I do remember it was
obviously New York.
Team. Yeah, New York. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I believe it was 2 Blazers games.
Yeah, I think it was 2 Blazers games and 2 Rockets games. I think that's what it was.
I need to look it up to be quite sure with you, but yeah, that was amidst Christian Wood. I think that's when he got the starting job around there for a brief period of time there, and the Mavericks offense was clicking on all cylinders between the Luka and Christian Wood pick and roll opportunities. They were definitely taking advantage of that, and diagnosing mismatches. I mean, it was fun to watch, but conversely, you did start to see the defensive shortcomings really start to plague this team, but they were just winning with hot shooting and their spacing being really good essentially. And it was definitely a high point in the season just because obviously the Mavericks, did not, I don't think they've gone on a win streak like that in a few years.
The 2011 season.
Yeah, since the 2011 season. And, it definitely felt oddly placed, like I said, given, the strength of schedule, but, you win 7 games in a row at the end of the day, you win 7 games in a row. You're up 7 games, contrary to what you were at. And from that reason alone, I think that, definitely catalyzed some hope within fans that, we were definitely going to be, vying for one of those top 4 seeds in the West at that point. But obviously things, went a little misdirection. There's, quite a bit of misdirection after that. But I mean, nonetheless, it was it was a fun time, and we were riding the high of the wave, even though it was also at a time that Jaren and I sort of tapered off in our coverage of the Mavericks.
Yeah, but
as well,
I mean, we got back on it.
We did get back on it at the most integral time.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll get to that moment later.
Yeah, we'll get to that moment later. But moving forward now to number 5. That was previously number 6. I don't know if I said that. Now to number 5. This is post Kyrie trade. It's the Luka Kyrie 40-point duel against the Philadelphia 76ers. I actually rewatched this game a few weeks ago just because, first off, it's brilliant basketball, and because I miss basketball so much that I actually had to watch a rare 22-23 Mavericks game that happened to have ended good. But yeah, it was a fun game to watch. Obviously, Luka and Kyrie went off. I think Luka had 42 and Kyrie had 41, if I remember right. It was somewhere around there, but either way, both players scored 40+ points. I think that was the first time that had happened. Was it since Game 7 of the 2016 Finals, or was that?
They made that.
I don't remember. I know that they were the first duo to do it in a very long time. Or they could have been the first duo to do it in general, but I'm not sure. But anyways, yeah, it was a critical time in the season. Of course, that win, I think, kind of revitalized a lot of hope for the Mavericks. That was kind of during that stretch of that March 5th game versus the Suns, and then of course that Lakers matinee day game, and then of course that Sixers game. They were all huge games that happened kind of back to back in a way. And Luka and Kyrie, of course, dominated the Sixers. It ended up being a good game, a close game. I think Josh Green kind of contributed quite a bit too in that performance, but I can't really think of anyone else that really had a decent game outside of those three. But either way, it was a fun game to watch. And I think, in regards to Luka and Kyrie, that was kind of the, oh shit, like this is what these guys could be on a night out basis. Of course, maybe not averaging 40, but the fact that these guys can average 30 to 25 a game on a night in and night out basis could be, pretty much crazy for any defense in the NBA. And that's kind of what we saw a little sneak peek of against the Philadelphia 76ers.
Yeah, and there was definitely, at least in the national media, this sort of developing narrative that Luka, but and Kyrie couldn't play together, and more specifically that Kyrie wasn't going to work out in Dallas. The naysayers were already calling it out, like literally 2 weeks out from the trade. I think that game, obviously the Mavericks went on to have a losing record with both of them playing, throughout the latter half of the season, and they're that narrative is still maintaining some decent strength over at ESPN, but they do have plenty of other talking points, and James Harden, Damian Lillard, interrupted offseason at this point. So it was very nice to sort of silence the doubters, at least for the time being, in that sense, because I think it at least did shine a little bit of a national spotlight on the fact that at least talking heads and people with any sense understood that Kyrie and Luka's fit together, and their inclusion as the two spearheads of the Mavericks organization is not the reason for last year's collapse at the end of the season. So that's why I appreciate that game so much, and it definitely is a game I'd would want to go back and watch the highlights of heading into next season to build the hype up. So honestly, might do that after this, because I'm getting hyped. But that was a fun game. So it deservingly gets the number 5 spot. But number 4, we've elected to put Jaden Hardy on draft night. His selection with Nico Harrison, trading, I believe, 2 future second-round picks, maybe like cash considerations, I can't even remember, to the Sacramento Kings for the number 37th pick in the draft, in the 2022 draft. We're technically including anything that happened in the season, even if it's just transactionally, from literally the genesis of the season at the draft all the way to the end. And obviously, getting Jaden Hardy there was one of the only good moves all of last season, from a transactional perspective. And the Mavericks hit the nail on the head with that pick there. Obviously, Hardy is poised to hopefully be in the rotation next year, despite Tim McMahon and Brian Damaris having needless to say, they're having a little bit of doubts about Hardy's spot in the rotation next year. But we'll see how that develops going forward, and I'm sure Tim Hardaway Jr. Possibly getting traded at one point or another could definitely skew how that ends up going as well. But I mean, at the end of the day, the Mavericks end up gathering a young player that they have clearly extracted positive value from, after I think the sort of vibe with him going into that draft was that the playmaking and the inefficiency from outside was something that was going to be holding him back from reaching his potential as soon as he could. And definitely a lot of areas to improve for Jaden going forward after having watched and observed his rookie season. But I think we can confidently say that there is enough there offensively, and he shot the ball well enough to where he definitely is an intriguing young player. So given that was one of the only moves that was that we can shed a positive light upon that the Mavericks made last year, it comes in at the number 4 spot here.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jaden Hardy, just in general as a player, was one of the very few positives of that 22-23 season. I think his emergence in the roster and his emergence on offense, particularly in that second half of the season, and as that season was kind of coming to a close, his emergence was really huge for the Mavericks. I think looking towards the future, he was really one of the first guys outside of Josh Green, maybe one of the first guys that the Mavericks had drafted, and we're looking forward to, offensive production or just production in general in the roster from those young guys. So to see him emerge and become, or I guess have a relatively successful rookie campaign, I think you only have to look back at that draft night trade and pretty much, assume that It's one of the better moves of the offseason, and it's one of the rare moves that the Mavericks had made that was positive outside of, really Kyrie and Jane Hardy. I really can't think of another positive move in hindsight. So I think, overall, it's definitely landing a top 5 spot. You can debate it. It wasn't that, it really didn't catch that many eyes whenever the move was made, from what I remember. But I think looking back at it, it should have been way more in the, national spotlight, of course, in the Dallas media spotlight. But Jane Hardy had a great rookie campaign. We'll see what he can do now. Of course, he has his doubters and he has our believers at the Mainstream Mavs Network. But we'll see going forward. But moving on to number 3, we have the infamous Maxi Kleber buzzer beater against I don't remember whenever it was, but against the Los Angeles Lakers, and that was a huge game from what I remember. If you want to go ahead.
Yes, this was in March, and it was right before I think the Mavericks had started running down the track of calling it quits, and it was like maybe just a week or two before
those, like a 4-game
those
losing
2
streak.
Hornets losses, and a series of unfortunate events and playing down to their opponents that Dallas suffered late in the season. But there was still a push to make the playoffs despite a growing sort of consensus within the fan base to tank or not tank. It was definitely a hot topic, of debate among fans at the time. But the Mavericks, were still statistically not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs or anything like that. And there were still definitely, I think by everybody involved, a sense of wanting to prove that, Luka and Kyrie could work together and this team could at least make the playoffs after having a Western Conference Finals appearance. And, I think that they were getting very desperate at this stage. They had just suffered a very tough loss to the Grizzlies the night before, and I can't remember exactly what happened, but I do remember Maxi Kleber making a pretty like boneheaded play, whether it was like an inbounds pass, he just like threw it out of bounds.
He threw the inbound pass out of bounds.
Yeah, that's what it was. Okay, yeah. And and Mavericks players obviously held him accountable, but in a respectful manner. And I do remember the Dallas media being obviously very critical of that, and how he essentially sold that game the night before, as crucial as the playoff race was at the moment. And it was a sort of a roundabout, just bearing all the fruits of your labor sort of way for him to, then reverse that psychology of having, just screwed up in one of the more crucial moments, in a late game situation of that season, that night before, to then come back off that Kyrie, pass where Kyrie gets trapped, gets it to Maxi on the weak side wing, and he just chucks it up wide open, gets the ball off, just with a few tenths of a second left, and just cashes it after I believe we were down by 2, right? Yeah. So I mean, it was to win it after we were down 2. I mean, it was definitely one of the coolest buzzer beaters that I've got a chance to watch for sure. Just given the context of it, as well as how timely it was, and it all just happening so last second, and the game situation, we were down by 2. So it doesn't, I don't think it trumps maybe some of the other two moments on this list, strictly because I think that they have more like long-standing significance when we're looking at them holistically, and what the accomplishments were in the top 2 spots. But in terms of one single moment, in time, I guess if we're viewing it like that, I might honestly put the Maxi buzzer beater like number 1.
Really?
Yeah.
Not over
And
Kyrie's, or not over Luka's performance?
Well, no, I mean I'm talking.
Are you talking about like moment?
One single moment in time. Yeah, I'm not talking about like
a game itself. Okay,
yeah, like, these are all moments technically, but if we're we're really getting intricate with it,
okay, that makes sense.
I'd still probably select Luka's put back though.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, to touch up on that Maxi buzzer beater, it was almost symbolic in a way, just because all the hardship that the Mavericks, or I guess rather all the failures that the Mavericks had in the previous weeks before that game, kind of just all mounted up into that Grizzlies game the game before. And then, of course, Maxi redeemed himself and really redeemed the team for that matter by making that buzzer beater. And you kind of saw everyone, coaches included, and I think even Mark Cuban, maybe if he was in attendance, I think he was actually. But you saw everybody pretty much run off the bench and storm Maxi Kleber, and it was a team huddle. at midcourt on the Lakers logo pretty much. And everyone was, very excited. And like I said, it was almost like a sigh of relief. And moving forward, at that point, we thought that the Mavericks were gonna make a run for the playoffs. Of course, that never happened. But yeah, it was almost symbolic in a way. And kind of looking back on it, it reminds me of the of course, under different circumstances, the Mavericks were a lot better. But of that Spencer Dinwiddie buzzer beater, where Luka got double teamed at the top of the key, kind of dumped it off to Spencer Dinwiddie on the strong side wing, and of course, Spencer Dinwiddie made it in Brooklyn, where he would end up being traded. So that's kind of funny now looking back at it. But yeah, it's almost symbolic of that, or reminds me of that rather. And yeah, I mean, I think in terms of moments, to your point, a singular moment in the NBA season for the Mavericks, I think that's probably number one.
Yeah, most definitely. Next up at number 2, we have the Kyrie trade / first game. Obviously, the Mavericks were without Luka Doncic heading into their first game with Kyrie Irving. They were playing the Los Angeles Clippers at the time, shortly right after the trade deadline, and Kyrie, just got shipped off for Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie, 2029 first round pick. And the vibe, just heading into that game was a sort of electric feel. Shout out to MGMT that I'd never really seen before, because there was never in my lifetime of watching the Dallas Mavericks as a player of that caliber, obviously been shipped to the Mavericks, mid-season, even much less at the beginning of the year as a free agent even signed. We have yet to even seen that yet. But to see that, and to just see a marquee player of Kyrie's caliber, and having known all the history and significance of what he means to the NBA, suit up in a Dallas Mavericks uniform while he's still kind of in his prime, for the first time, just out of nowhere, to an extent. Obviously, there was a growing sense that Kyrie may get shipped off right before he did, because it did seem like Josai at that point was just kind of done with the BS.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, and that's not me saying that it was Kyrie specifically that was causing issues up there, but there was a ton of like trade requests between him and KD, and that's obviously when the Nets chose to pick another direction. But nonetheless, it was just a really weird time to be a Mavericks fan, because things changed from what we were so accustomed to in just the blink of an eye, and obviously I don't think everybody in Dallas was like entirely thrilled by the move at the time, even though the Mainstream Mouse podcast was very in huge support of Kyrie, welcomed him with open arms. But I can't say that that was the consensus for everybody within the Dallas media. I mean, I think everybody was at least excited, but I don't know
Maybe
if
not
everybody...
Brown Townsend.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's what I was gonna. No, but not everybody essentially, was hell bent on this thing working out, and I mean, it still may not in the end in terms of what ends up happening at the end of these next 2 seasons before Kyrie's contract likely expires with his player option. But I mean, needless to say, it was just a really cool time when that happened, and I thought it boded a lot of significance, just for me personally, in terms of my time being a Mavericks fan, getting to see somebody like that step up on the floor for the first time, that came here via a transaction, whether it's free agency or a trade. It was not a homegrown product like Dirk or Luka. It was weird seeing somebody of that caliber suit up in a Mavericks uniform, and Kyrie balled out in his first game versus the Clippers too. The Mavericks ended up closing that game out late in the fourth quarter. Wire to wire, it was a pretty competitive game. They were going back and forth, and I mean, it kind of was capped off there by Kyrie hitting that tough, wrong-footed, right-handed floater
that got blocked,
yes,
and then
well, no, over Kawhi.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm
it
saying.
got
Like,
blocked.
Kawhi had a hand on it. Yeah,
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he had a hand on it, and
Oh, yeah.
ended up like somehow pulling it away and getting it off still in midair.
That was
It's incredible.
ridiculous.
But,
Yeah, that's crazy. But that for that reason, that is going to be number 2, and I think unless you have anything to say on it, Jaren, I think for both of us, I can definitely say that it was one of the happiest times of the season from an excitement perspective for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and just to touch up, I mean, that was probably for me in terms of my fanship and how long I've been a fan. That's probably a top 3 moment in terms of regular season games that have happened because again, I mean, Kyrie Irving was a Maverick, and again, I wasn't a huge proponent of that trade even happening. I remember one of the rumors were happening it was either just hours before or just a day before, whenever the Mavericks were rumored to be involved in a Kyrie Irving trade. I wasn't the biggest advocate of it, but I do remember whenever he was traded there, you kind of have to swallow your pill there, and you have to say Kyrie Irving is a Dallas Maverick.
Well,
what else can you want?
I think depending on the package too, because I do think a lot of us, thought that because there was this very sort of up in the air perception of Kyrie's value, and I still don't know if we could properly gauge it because he's just an extremely volatile, both not on the court but off the court obviously. And that's not a discredit to him. I'm just, talking strictly about, what we can take from the last couple of years of his time in Brooklyn. And obviously, it's like, he is 30, 31 years old. But he's so damn good. He is an all NBA talent. Should we
NBA 75 talent at that?
No, yes, but we're not going to talk about that. But moving on, obviously, we have Luka's 60, 20, and 10 game versus the New York Knicks on December 27th. Definitely, might have been the single greatest individual performance of the 2022-23 NBA season as a whole. I'm obviously, I think somebody scored over 70 this year.
Donovan Mitchell.
Mitchell, yeah. And then he had a very similar putback off of a missed free throw. So you can probably argue that one, I guess, but conversely, he also didn't have 20 rebounds and 10 assists. It was the single greatest basketball performance I've ever seen live, and I, to this day, I'm still blessed to have been able to witness that with Jaren. And it's funny because we honestly will probably go to more games last year, but in like the 4 or 5 games that we were able to go to last year, we were somehow fortunate enough to go see Luka, because we were obviously, going there in the first place to see Jalen Brunson's return. And, we were bummed out pregame when we found out that he wasn't playing. And I think that sort of vibe that of bumminess definitely turned into that of an immaculate vibe to flip it on its head.
If I remember right, with 33 seconds left, the Mavericks were down by 9 points, and the Knicks actually had the ball, I'm pretty sure. We actually, I don't mean to be this way. We are very good Mavericks fans. As you can see, we have a podcast, but we actually thought about walking out because, again, it was very frustrating to that point because the Mavericks couldn't get anything going. And the Knicks weren't necessarily playing great. They were just playing enough to kind of.
We never walk out of games, by the way.
Yeah, we never walk out of games, and that's why to even think about that was pretty strong.
Yeah, but it was just like a few seconds left is much different than a few minutes left. Yeah. So I mean, we were just trying to get a little head start, but it was definitely just one. It was essentially like immaculate conception. Essentially, it was as improbable as the birth of baby Jesus, the Mavericks coming back within those last waning moments of that game. Luka had like an and one, and just comes back and gets the missed free throw, somehow ties the game up. The Mavericks win in OT, just going absolutely ballistically offensively. I would encourage you guys to go listen to our podcast from that game if you can somehow find it. It's deep in the trenches, but I thought Jaren and I did a pretty good job at the time of summarizing both the significance of Luka to this organization as well as just how good of an on-court product he was. We talked ad nauseum for like an hour and a half almost about the game, and our experience there was definitely the funnest time I've had as a Mavericks fan this season. I thought that was like for sure the turning point. I was like, this dude's at another stratosphere right now. Regardless of how bad our team sucks, I was riding a high of Luka Doncic's performance, and I obviously ended up coming down off that a little bit. But needless to say, he had entered a realm of, I think that definitely like planted and, stamped him as, potentially a top 75 player of all time. After that feat. Yeah. I think that, definitively put him in there. Because well, what he did throughout that stretch, and I'm not saying he's the first guy to have ever done something like that. Obviously,
Well, I mean, he
James
technically
Harden.
was, but
Well, yeah.
yeah,
The stat line
yeah,
itself,
yeah.
yes, but performances of that caliber, like we've seen, certain guys have them, but to get 60, 20, and 10 like that, that's something only the greats are doing, and that's every once in a while you get um the improbable like Terrence Ross 50-point performance or Andre Miller going off for 50, something like that. I remember Corey Brewer got one
Corey
back
Brewer
a
got
few
one.
years ago.
Yep.
But those are essentially just bench guys that end up getting really hot and have a good shooting night. To place yourself within the realm of guys that got a 60-point triple double, and that all not just a 60-point triple double, but a 60, 20, and 10 triple double. To be the first person in history to ever do that while hitting an insane game tying shot at the end of regulation that I think epitomizes Luka's style of basketball to a T. Just based on the whole improbability aspect of it all, and how he sees angles and sees different ways to drive, and not only just shoot from different spots, but be able to facilitate to guys that the average Joe watching on TV can't even see, looking at a literal 5-on-5 diagram on a screen, where you have literally the whole landscape to be able to peruse over. And Luka's proved me wrong with some of the passes that he saw ahead of time. And he's actually in the game, and I couldn't even have spotted it on TV. So that for him to do that, that in making that shot after the rebound off the missed free throw intentionally, like I said, it just sums up his his basketball game, and certainly epitomizes it, because of how unpredictable he can be, and how good he is in adverse situations where he's counted out all the time, and that's why that moment will forever be special to me. And as far as attending it goes, definitely one of the coolest things I probably not just got to experience from a Mavericks perspective, but definitely in my life for sure.
Yeah, it probably will go down as one of the best moments that I've ever witnessed, or at least athletic feats that I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. And that's honestly a fact. But yeah, I mean, to your point, just the improbability of the shot alone was incredible, and to see it go down, and of course his way of celebrating, and his victory beers after were only symbolic of what kind of occurred during that game. So it was definitely fun to watch. But honestly, moving forward, I think that in terms of off-season stuff, I think that we can probably start making this a yearly thing where we go over the top 10 best moments.
Yes, the mainstream Mavs. We're gonna embed mainstream LLC, down at the bottom, and not let anybody get the trademarks to doing any more top 10 moments in general.
Yeah.
Any Mavs podcast that does a top 10 moments,
It's to the courts.
It's to the courts, yeah. Unless they're associated with the Smoking Cuban, we'll
let them slide. Yeah.
But
It'd actually be civil courts, not criminal law. So or whatever the other one's called. But
yes. But anyways, we do appreciate you guys for listening this far in the podcast. Make sure, like Jaren and I said, to go check out all of our work over at the Smoking Cuban. Jaren, you just released 3 reasons to look forward to this upcoming season for the Mavericks, and two reasons to not look forward to it.
It was 3 positives and basically 2 negatives of this upcoming season.
Yes. So go check that out. I just released articles in regards to Josh Green, potentially 3 reasons why he could become an all-star. I'm not saying that I think he will, but I do list a variety of reasons that possibility could present itself, and it's pretty it was a fun piece to write, and I wrote a piece about Mike Miles. We both got some stuff up about the schedules, and we obviously we have things in the work all the time.
Absolutely.
I
got a big article, a fun article, maybe not fun for fans, but a fun article for me coming out about Josh Green later this week. I won't release that title, but it's going to be pretty controversy. I'll say that, or controversy, whatever.
I have an article coming up.
Controversial. There we go.
About a unreleased piece of media that will be hitting the streets on September 8th. So I talk about that, and I'm not going to disclose the name for anybody who's clueless as to what I'm talking about. Then you just look up September 8th and what happens on that day. That not September 11th though. Don't do that. All right. But anyways, this has been the Mainstream Mavs podcast. We've obviously overextended our stay, but
we've overextended our stay in this little.
We only have 4 minutes left.
Yes,
technically. We're definitely running in the fringes here, but we have definitely enjoyed our new setting. Perhaps we'll do more podcasts here. You guys will get to see this beautiful
sound.
It's beautiful. Sound steel. But I mean, we're definitely we got a cool little setup here if you guys can't see.
Block his face up.
Yeah. Second. But yeah, we're in this study room is definitely a vibe for sure. So perhaps more content will be produced here. But yes, check out all our stuff on the Smoking Cuban. Make sure to get at us on YouTube, Mainstream Mavs Podcast on YouTube. Like, comment down below. Who needs a back to school haircut more, Jaren or Will? Comment that down below. As a big debate. They both actually got ones before school started, but admittedly,
mine was like a few weeks.
Yes, mine was a few weeks, or mine was like a week before. So perhaps they should have got it, a little closer to the date. Yeah. Let us know. Also, make sure to turn on post notifications, whether you're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, so you guys can stay up to date with whenever our podcasts come out. And if you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or on any other listening platform, we really do appreciate you. Make sure to follow us, give us a 5-star review if you do feel so inclined. We appreciate any feedback we can get, and we do really appreciate each and every one of you guys that listens and has supported our stretch of infrequent but banger podcasts this summer, because we have been busy with some, me personally, Jaren's been fine, but I've had some things in my personal life as of recently that have definitely been unexpected and derailed the podcast a little bit. But now that we have adjusted to our school schedule and what have you, I think that we are both poised to be uploading on a very frequent basis, most likely bi-daily is the goal moving forward. I'm sure that we will not always meet that threshold, but
you will hold us accountable.
Yes, I will personally hold, the fans will hold us accountable, but we will be more persistent, most definitely. And if for some reason we do end up having to ever take off a day, which I hope will be on a very infrequent basis, maybe like once a month or whatever, then we will make sure to let you guys know on Twitter, and you'll get updates about that. So that'll be the policy from here on going forward. So we are excited about that, and about the future of this podcast as we head into year 2 of the Mainstream Mavs podcast. It is, but we will catch you guys in the next one. This has been Will and Jaren with the Mainstream Mavs podcast. Follow us on Twitter as well, at Mainstream214, at Jaren Boslow, at Will Mill J. Those are all the handles that you need to go follow our individual Twitters as well as podcast account Twitters. We will catch you guys in the next one. Mainstream Mavs podcast signing out. Bye-bye.